Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Spring Summit for the Institute of Child Psychology. We are so grateful here to have Rosalia Rivera, who is going to talk to us all about body secrets and preventing childhood sexual abuse, essentially, and to also talk a little bit about consent. She is a consent educator, actually, and she's a 2-time TEDx speaker, abuse specialist, a sexual literacy advocate, and the founder of Consent Parenting, and the host of the About Consent podcast. She's also a CSA, or a child sexual abuse survivor turned thriver. She's the parent of 3 children from a family of survivors. She discovered how triggering it was to learn about abuse prevention when it was time to educate her own kids. Once she became a mom, determined to break the intergenerational cycle of abuse, she dedicated herself to the healing so she could overcome anxiety and triggers that kept coming up when learning about abuse prevention so she could teach her kids. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah. So let's I'm going to let you take the lead, actually, but I'm a specialist in working with kids who have been traumatized. But today we're focusing more on prevention, body secrets, red flags, and also about how we start from very young teaching kids about keeping their body safe and the start of how we teach consent.
Yeah. I love that we're talking about this because I feel like it doesn't get talked about enough when it comes to parenting, because unfortunately a lot of parents have the idea that this doesn't happen within their circle or their community, within their school or neighborhood. But sadly, the statistics point to a different reality. And unfortunately, what's been happening in the last even 10 years is that one of the types of abuse that most parents would never think happens is on the rise, which is peer-to-peer abuse. So it's really important that parents understand that it's not something that just happens between adults and children. It's also peer-to-peer abuse for a number of reasons. But the focus for parents, instead of just worrying about something like this happening potentially, or even thinking, again, not my kid. I always say the NMK syndrome, the not my kid syndrome. For parents who aren't aware or aren't educated about this issue, they may think, it doesn't happen here, so I don't have to worry about that. I don't have to think about prevention. And unfortunately, that's just not the reality that we're living in 2025. These rates are on the rise, and that's in person or online. So contact offenses and non-contact offenses. But the good news is that prevention, education, can really reduce rates almost to the point where we can say it can prevent it altogether. So the good news is education is one of the most powerful tools that we have. And I'm so excited to talk about that today and the ways that we can educate ourselves. What should we focus on and prioritize so that we can reduce these rates and make sure that, it isn't your kid, that it is, you are able to say not my kid because you're educated, not because you lack the awareness and information to really say that.
Yeah. I know, as somebody who treated a lot of children who have been sexually abused, I think we shifted. For a long time, we thought it was like some stranger in a van took your kid and they did these things. Then we shifted to, it's like a coach, or it could be a teacher, or like someone you trust in your circle. But what I see more than anything in my practice has been peers, daycares, schools, on the playground, like in plain sight, like having a sleepover, having just a friend over for a play date. Like that has been the most common sexual abuse that I've seen, which as a parent, has led me to probably have a lot of conversations with my kids similar to what we're going to talk about. And that's the one I'm the most vigilant about, is when my kids go to another parent's, another home. Even if I know the parents, we have to have these conversations, or they're out with their friends. That's where I actually worry the most.
Yeah. So thank you for adding some real world experience to that, just to say, these rates used to be 40% for peer-to-peer. When I started doing this work almost 10 years ago, that was the rate that I had seen as the statistic. And I was really surprised because, again, we tend to think it's the adult, right? The potential offender. Today, and the most recent studies that came out in 2022, the rates have gone up to 70% as being perpetrated by a peer versus 40%, almost 10 years ago. So these numbers should be concerning because there's a lot of reasons. There's a lot of why, but we don't need to focus on that too much today. What I do want parents to know and walk away with is one of the highest rates of peer-to-peer is sibling. So that could include a step sibling, a cousin who lives in the home, a biological sibling. But a lot of these can be for reasons that are very easy for us to mitigate, right? And if we focus on this prevention piece and helping kids understand, first of all, what their rights are for their body, this is one of the foundational pieces that we need to be talking about to our kids as early as possible. Pretty much as soon as they start to have that self-awareness, of their body, they start to really identify like the parts of their body and the functions of those bodies. That's the time when we have to start teaching kids about the idea of autonomy, how autonomy gets unlocked at different stages of their life. And just giving kids that information really helps empower them with the understanding that if they don't like something that's happening to their body, they can use their voice and tell us, tell their parents and talk to them about what's going on. So that's just a first step. And I think a lot of parents are starting to get on that bandwagon of like, I'm not going to force my kid to hug or kiss anyone. But we want to go beyond just the hug and kiss. Like if your kid doesn't want to get tickled, if they don't want to get picked up, if somebody's pinching their cheeks, if somebody's patting them on the head and they don't like it, they should be able to vocalize that either to their trusted adult or to be able to just vocalize it directly to the person or the peer who is doing that. And I think that's kind of easy to do when we're talking about like nobody should push you in the playground and, those kinds of things, which is a really great starting point as a conversation. But the next piece is like helping kids understand boundaries, right? So then we want to talk to them about like what a boundary is. How do they determine what their boundaries are? How do they vocalize those boundaries? And what do they do if those boundaries get crossed, whether it's a peer or an adult? So really establishing that is going to also really help them understand where does my body begin and end, and how do I vocalize when something's not okay, right? So then we can start entering into conversations around like how to seek help. And I think that's a really important piece for parents to talk to kids about is like the reporting piece, because especially with really young kids, they can't always verbalize or they can't always tell exactly what happened or, if somebody made them uncomfortable, but they can tell you, I don't like this person or I don't feel comfortable. You may not need to know exactly why, but it just is information to take seriously and say, okay, well, what's going on with this friendship or with this relationship? What do I need to, be more vigilant about? And give your child that independence from that person. If they say they're not comfortable with them, don't put them, in the care of that person again without doing a deeper dive into what's going on. And the second piece, beyond educating our kids, and I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but the second piece that's really important for parents to understand is that when we're talking about abuse prevention, we want to not only focus on educating our kids, but educating the adults who are in care of our kids. So that could even mean, like you said, when if you're doing a sleepover, you want to have a conversation with that family to find out, are they teaching abuse prevention? What are the dynamics in the home? Does that child have access to the internet? Or do they have a sibling, an older sibling who has unfettered access to the internet? Those are going to help you have better informed decision-making capacity versus like just dropping your kid off because you think you've known this person for a while or they seem nice and, your kid knows them and you feel like you can trust them, but you don't really have that information to make that decision. You're just kind of going by gut. And trusting your gut is great, but a lot of times, unfortunately, offenders, if they're adults, can seem very nice. They can, trick people into thinking that they're, a good person and a good home and etc. But you haven't vetted it, right? So make sure that you are having conversations, whether that's your child's teacher or coach or a neighbor or even someone who you've known forever. That can be, your own sibling, an uncle or an aunt. Do your due diligence and get that information, but also have the conversations and inform others that you're teaching body safety, because that's also a deterrent to potential offenders when we're talking about adults. As it relates to peers, make sure that you are doing due diligence in terms of like if you're you're hosting a friend over, don't do closed doors. Make sure that they're playing in a common space where you have a line of sight. Talk openly about body safety policies. If your kids are a little bit older and they have a device, have a policy that when kids are over at your house or your child goes over to someone else's house, there's no playing with devices. Those can be put aside. And if, a child needs to make a call to their parents, that's the only, time that they have access to that device is to make that call. But otherwise, have that policy of making sure that you're not just allowing unfettered access. So those kinds of things, beyond just teaching your child, that you have some good policies and you're also communicating it with other adults.
Yeah, we're having, actually, it's a perfect timing for this masterclass. My 11-year-old is having her birthday in a few weeks. And I just sent the text message out to the parents, whom I all know, but still it was very clearly outlined that it is a sleepover. However, no one is forced to come to sleepover. If you're comfortable, just come for cake and pizza, that is fine. However, just the girls, will be sleeping in the living room. So it's an open area. We'll be watching movies. We'll be up with them until it's time for bed. Lights go out. And we also always take the kids' devices. So kids can't have devices for this. We know pornography and things like that. We are concerned about that because we don't always know what has been taught in other homes. We have security on our kids' phones through the Circle app, so they can't access images like that, but I don't know about other people's devices.
Right.
So those are just some of the steps, being aware of that some parents can look at, but those are questions you can ask at the sleepover too.
Yeah.
Where are the kids sleeping? Where are the other siblings? Who's in the house? I know that can be a difficult and awkward conversation to have, but
I think yeah, absolutely. And kudos to all the steps that you're taking to do that. I think that's so important, especially, for parents who don't want to give up the idea of sleepovers. They may have had great, experiences at sleepovers. But like you said, statistically speaking, this is one of the situations where abuse can happen. Again, both contact or non-contact, right? So if a friend has a device and a lot of times inappropriate stuff comes up even when you're not looking for it, right? So just being aware of like who's got what device and making sure that that's not something that's openly accessible to everyone. But like you said, in terms of having those conversations with other adults, it can feel awkward only because we feel like it is an awkward conversation. So if we shift our mindset around this and say, this is a conversation that we should all be normalizing. So the more often that we all have it, the more normal it's going to become, and then it won't feel awkward. But the way that you can broach it is always by saying, this is what we're doing in our home. And we are having these conversations because we are learning about how prevalent these things are between both adults and peers. And so we're doing our best to make sure that we're reducing risk by asking these really weird questions that may seem weird initially, and you can joke about it and say like, I know this is probably really awkward. It's awkward for me asking. It might feel awkward for you hearing it. But based on what I've learned, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys are experiencing abuse. And these are conservative rates, right? Like they're very likely much higher. But because of these rates, we want to do our part to help reduce that, not just for our kids, but for everybody's kids. So this is a conversation we're having in our home. We're talking about this, and experts are saying these are questions we should be asking. So pardon me for asking these. I'm really just trying to do what I'm learning. And, you can use the excuse of, this is what experts are saying, we should be doing. So when you ask those questions and you normalize it, and it might turn into a conversation of like, yeah, it's so kind of weird, but like, yeah, those rates are pretty high. Like, and it just can naturally open up a whole conversation around this topic that maybe those parents never thought of, or they were thinking of it and they're so relieved that you're thinking of it. And it might help you establish a common ground of like, okay, you know what, this truly is a safe family. They're doing their work on this and we're doing it, and they're interested in us kind of collaborating on this even. How fantastic, right? Or you get a family who's like, oh, that's, we don't have to worry about that. That's not anything that we've thought about. Like, and now you have some information about that family of like how you want to proceed with drop-off play dates or how safe that parent feels. Or if you have a gut feeling and you talk about it, it can reinforce either you were right, this seems like an unsafe, home, or wow, I was wrong. And I'm so glad that I talked about this. And you're still going to, be on like staying aware and on top of it. But at least you have a little bit more information and you're getting more and more comfortable having these conversations. And it's almost, it's like any muscle. The more you work it, the easier it feels. It's not going to be as hard to do the next time. It will be easier to have a conversation with a teacher or with a neighbor because you've practiced having it with the people that you already are familiar with.
Okay. One of the things that I know is common with working with these kids for the last 15 years is a common thread that comes up for me are secrets, whether it's peers or adults. Like sometimes there's bodily threats with adults saying like, if you tell someone like, I'll hurt your family or I'll hurt your sibling. But more often than not, it's just something with a peer that says like, this is a secret between us, or even, with when it happens within the family. How do we talk to kids about that? Because of course, like kids like their secrets. This is a normal thing we see kids start to do when they're very young. So how would you open that conversation about that?
Yeah, and before I even answer your question, I just want to make sure that parents understand that secrets are also part of the grooming process. And just quickly to say what the grooming process is. Essentially, when it comes to adults grooming children, the grooming process happens by it's a process that they implement of behaviors, sort of tests in a way to see, is this child, going to be an easy target? And so they will select based on the parents. Are the parents an easy target? Because the grooming starts with the parents. So this is like ingratiating themselves with the parents. And then they'll ingratiate themselves with the kids once they have that access. So the parent got groomed, then they give access to the child because they still don't know that this is an unsafe person, right? The whole point of grooming is to make you feel safe, make you feel like this is a good person and someone that I can trust. So they're breaking down your barriers to trick you into thinking they're a good person. So you give them access to your child. And then they begin the grooming process with your child, which is to, again, make the child trust them. And part of this process is getting them to accept secrets as part of their relationship. Because secrets can be really fun, right? Secrets are about, I have this special bond with this person or this special knowledge that nobody else has. So it can feel really like you're creating this special relationship with a person. So whether that's adults or peers. So that's what makes secrets so alluring. And also, not all secrets are bad in a sense, the way that abusers will use it. So they might say, hey, I'll give you this candy, but don't tell your parents because then they won't let me give you more candy. So if we keep it between us. And so this is a way for offenders to test if a child is even willing to keep a secret because it feels like an innocent secret. And then it can escalate and it can turn into, bigger secrets until the abuse starts to happen. And then the child feels like I had kept all of these secrets from my parents. And now they're going to find out about all these other things on top of this. And I will feel like I gave permission to do this, so they will feel implicated. So I always am cautious with parents who say like, oh, we only do good secrets, but we want to make sure that we keep a distinction between secrets, surprises, and privacy. And when we help break it down that way for kids, it makes it really clear. So what we want to say to kids in terms of teaching them about this is there are no good secrets. It may feel like they're fun secrets, but really there are no good secrets. And you can keep secrets between you and your friends, but there are no secrets between mom and dad and you. So even if you have secrets between your friends, you still have to let us know what those are. So this gives permission to the kids to say, so-and-so told me about this thing, but they said not to tell. But, I'm letting you know because we don't keep secrets. But is it okay for me to have that secret, right? And you can even break this down with grandparents. Like a lot of times grandparents will be like, I'm going to give you this little bit of ice cream, but don't tell your parents. The answer that they should be giving is, we don't keep secrets from mom and dad, right? And that might feel hard at first because, you have to also talk to the adults about this. So like you have to tell grandma and grandpa, hey, we're doing this no secrets policy, so please don't keep secrets, and explain the reasons why, explain about the grooming process. Because usually grandparents are like, well, that, I'm not gonna be able to have this little special thing with my grandkid. But if you explain to them the why, they'll understand and they will recognize that it's not actually safe. We're actually kind of setting kids up for grooming when we allow that. So helping to explain this idea to the close people around us will help them to not, do this with them. Because again, secrets can feel very innocent. And so if someone thinks, oh, well, I'm not, making them keep a secret that's unsafe, they might continue to do it. As to kids, we just want to explain to them there are secrets, which are things that we are not supposed to tell ever. And those are unsafe because it might be something that you don't know yet is unsafe. A person might try to trick you. We want to explain the concept of tricky people too, which I'll share in a second. But so we want to say, we don't know. Someone might be asking you to keep a secret, but you don't know at first if it's a safe or unsafe secret. So no secrets are safe, especially for mom and dad. So if someone asks you for that and you feel like, you can't say no in that moment, let us know after, right? And we can tell you we can let you know if that was okay or not okay. And so there's, establish a no secrets rule and explain. Surprises, on the other hand, are things like for birthday parties, if you want to surprise someone or you have a surprise gift, they're going to learn about it. And, it's just a timed secret. So surprises are going to, be told at a certain time. It should be a short amount of time. And that's when you can, you'll be able to tell it. So it kind of feels like there's some anticipation. It can feel fun. It can feel like there's, good things that are going to come out of that, potentially short secret or surprise. So that would be a way to distinguish, the secrets and surprises. And then private information, because a lot of parents ask about this, like, what about something that is just private, but it's not necessarily a secret, but it's also not a surprise? So private information would be like not giving someone that you don't know your address, or not, giving someone that you don't know well or that you don't trust or that isn't a trustworthy person information about your family that they, shouldn't know because they don't know you. So you might meet somebody at the playground and they start asking, like, where do you live? Or, who's your mom? Or what's your last name? Or whatever that information is. You can say, well, that's private information, and I have to ask my mom if it's okay for me to share that. So that is also important to help kids distinguish, especially if they're older. Like the younger kids may not necessarily get that right away, but older kids should definitely have that too.
When they're on social, if you have a teen on social media or something and someone, it's like a request of somebody you don't know, like a friend request. It's like, if you don't know this person, we shouldn't be accepting that. That's right. Private. Like your information is on there. I do have a question because I have an 11-year-old. Because girls will keep secrets between girls. We start to see this a lot at this age. It's tween kind of age. And we've been very clear in our family using the whole, like, we don't keep secrets from the kids from us, right? But if you had, I'm not sure how old your kids are, but if you have, say your daughter says, well, what if my friend tells me something and doesn't want me to share it with our other friends? What would you call that? Because I get that. Like there's some things, because she has friends who she's closer with than other ones. So would you say that's like private, or would you still call it a secret? It's not secret from me, but it's as a parent, but it is, they don't want it shared with other kids.
Yeah, so I would say that is private information. Someone shared something with me privately and they asked me not to share it with others. Now, what the distinction that I make, especially for older kids, is if that's information about them that they feel like it's personal or private information about them that they're sharing and they're asking you not to share it, then what you're doing is respecting their privacy. But when they're saying something that is about somebody else, and it's almost like gossip, that they're trying to keep from being spread, then that's more of a conversation of values. And that is, as kids get older, it's a conversation of like, well, what are the sort of implications of keeping that information to yourself if it's about other people? And does that actually harm other people? Is that really not respecting the privacy of that other person, right? So really it's more about getting into like the values of like, why are you holding on to that? Why did that person ask you to hold on to that? Is it actually respecting the privacy of the other people who are involved in that? So really, it's more of a conversation of like, why did they ask you to keep that information secret? Is it harming anyone? And is it going against your values to keep that information a secret, right? So it actually will, breaking it down, like, and this is one of the great reasons why if you have that open relationship with your child where they're like, so-and-so asked me to keep a secret. I don't keep secrets from you, so I'm sharing with you. Like, what do you think of this situation? You now are in a position where you can help guide them to critically think about the situation, right? And help them learn how to critically think about situations like this, which will help them in the future too, once they are in their own intimate relationships, right? Where they're like, this doesn't feel right. And how can I critically think about the position I've been put in? So these kinds of conversations can really help the child develop these critical thinking skills as they get older. But that, for an older kid, I would say you can help them work through what is the difference between, when we've talked about secrets, surprises, and privacy, where does this fall in? And you can help them break that down.
Well, that's, I think, in another conversation, like you said, gossip is being able for kids to understand how that's really harmful to other kids socially, right? But I really like the idea of very young saying to a child, if anybody asks you to keep a secret from me or your father or mom and mom, like whoever the adults are taking the primary attachment figures, that's the red flag, especially from the parents. So there's a really good, I think, step we can take. And I really liked at the beginning of this conversation, you can do this so quickly with your kids when they're young. If someone says stop, I don't care what we're doing, hugging, play fighting. If someone says stop, we immediately say, what did they say? Like when someone says stop, we stop. And even if it's well-intentioned, they're just having fun, that I know that's a big one. If I hear the word stop, I'm like, did everyone stop?
Yeah. I also want to say there's also red stop. A lot of times you can be in a game where you can say stop, but the person seems like they're giggling really hard. And I think for young kids especially, it's really important for them to have a safety word in a way that it's like, okay, I was joking and I wanted him to stop. And the other kid might say, well, he was giggling and I couldn't tell if he really wanted me to stop. Maybe they're, have impulse control issues, right? Where it's like they wanted to tickle the other kid and they didn't want to stop and they heard him say stop, but they thought that they were joking. This has happened so often between kids. Parents tell me about these situations and I always say, well, have a safety word where it's like red stop. I really meant it, and kids will learn, okay, that he's not playing, he's not enjoying it. This wasn't, so just having some levels of that is also helpful, especially between siblings or, friends that are really close, to just have look, when I say red stop, I'm serious. So just some additional ways around that. But I wanted to just circle back to the concept of tricky people, if that's okay.
Oh, it's so perfect because I actually just pulled up an infographic we have on this. So I'm going to see what we can add to it and what are some of the notes I have about this.
Okay, great.
Because we just did a new segment a couple months ago talking about, we talk about tricky people, not stranger danger, because 93% of sexual abuse happens with someone a child knows. They're not strangers.
Exactly.
And I think when we say stranger, that prohibits kids from sharing important information with police officers or firefighters, or maybe they've never met the school counselor before and that is a stranger to them. But that person can be very helpful.
Right. Yeah. Not all strangers are bad anyway. Most people are good. And I think that that's an important message to get across to kids too. It's like most people are good. And we don't want kids to walk around fearing everybody or anybody. We want them to learn how to distinguish, but like you said, it is about strange behavior, right? Tricky behavior. So red flag behavior. So however you want to call it, what I tend to like to use is red flag behavior, because then kids recognize, okay, that means that something's off, something's not right. One of the books that I really love for talking about this is from Kimberly King, called I Said No. I think her book is being revised right now, so I'm not sure if it's even for sale, but it will be soon again. And she talks about in that book red flags and why that was even used, which was, something that sailors would use, for ships. And if there was a red flag, that there was danger ahead. So when we talk to kids about recognizing unsafe behavior, we can use that. Was that a red flag behavior? And they will recognize, okay, something was off about that. So when we talk about tricky people, we're talking about when it's hard to see the red flag behavior because we think it's green flag behavior. We think it's okay. And so how do we identify if someone is being tricky? And the first thing that we want to establish for kids is a baseline of actually what is safe. What is a safe person, right? And then if they are not behaving that way, then they might be a tricky person. So we want to establish that baseline. And what a safe person is, they have 4 basic qualities that make them safe. And the first one is that they would never break a body safety rule. So you, of course, have to establish what body safety rules are first. And so if you want, just a quick sort of overview of that is someone who, doesn't touch or ask you to show private parts or would never ask you to do that to them. It's someone who, stops when you want them to stop if they are doing something that you're uncomfortable with. So if, someone's tickling you or hugging you too tight or wants to kiss you a certain way and that doesn't feel right, then you get to say stop. And if they don't stop, then, that's not safe. Then they're not behaving, they're breaking a body safety rule. So want to break down what those things are and then say someone who breaks a body safety rule is not safe. The second thing that a safe person will do is that they would never ask them to keep a secret. So ideally, this is, the circle of people around them. You've had those conversations with either grandma or grandpa or your family members to say, this is what we're doing, so please don't ask to keep a secret. And you can tell your kid, I've talked to our adults in our family, they know not to keep, not to ask for a secret. for you to keep a secret. So a safe adult would never ask you to keep a secret. So that's the second thing a safe person would never do. They would never break a body safety rule, and they would never ask you to keep a secret. The third thing that a safe person would do is that they would believe you if you're ever in trouble, if you're ever in danger, if something happened, they will believe you. They're not going to say, oh, you're lying, or that's not true, or it was probably your fault. Like, they would never say things like that, right? So a safe person will believe you if you tell them that you need help or you're in trouble. And the fourth thing that a safe person would do is that they will help you. They will help you get out of an unsafe situation. They will help you find safety. They will help you access your parents, right? So they will be that bridge to safety for you. So those are the four things that a safe person would do. And if someone is behaving different from those things, then they might be a tricky person. So a person might say, oh, let's go get ice cream, but don't tell mom and dad. Well, if you say, mom and dad, we don't keep secrets from mom and dad, and they say, oh, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. It's just ice cream. Like, nobody's getting hurt. There's nothing wrong. Like, we'll just go do this. You don't have to tell them. Like, and then you have ice cream, right? That might be a tricky person. And so you painting these kind of examples for them are really helpful for kids, especially the younger that they are. This is a really hard concept for kids under 4. So
yeah,
I always
say, like, you've got to have this conversation with the caregivers, like grandparents, aunts, uncles, babysitters, that
totally,
we don't use this word. We say that they're not to keep secrets. So if it's, you just ask us, like, we just don't, and this is prevention. It doesn't mean you're bad grandma. It doesn't mean you're bad grandpa.
Exactly.
We don't want someone else to use this against the child. Like,
exactly.
Against our kid. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is, I always say when we're talking to the other adults, just remember that we can call people into what we're doing. We're not trying to call anyone out. So if someone feels called out, there might be a reason for it. And I always say, like, take caution for that. But most of the time people want to participate. So if the way that we propose it or pitch it, in a sense, to the person we're talking to makes a big difference. So the way that I would say it to grandma or grandpa is, hey, we just wanted to let you know that we're doing this education. We learned about this. This is what grooming is. This is why we're asking you for this. And so we just wanted to let you know, would you be part of our safety team? If we're calling them in, then they want to participate and they have an understanding of why. Because again, remember, you're learning about this just as much as they're going to be learning about this. So just because they don't know and you give them this instruction, they're going to have more resistance than if they understand the why. So be part of our safety team. We'd love for you to help us teach this. And here's why. Then they're going to be on board 99% of the time.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I feel like they just don't want to. I think most people don't want to feel coerced or controlled. So if we give them the why and we're saying, like, we're collaborating, we're not. You sometimes have that with grandparents. They're like, I've done this before and I know what I'm doing. And we're like, well, actually things have changed a little bit. So, but saying that this is a partnership for you're raising my kid with you.
Yeah, get on our team.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the last thing I wanted to say about tricky people too is that we can give kids, especially if they're on the younger end of the spectrum, we can give them some examples of tricky people. And one of the ones that I love using for little kids is, like, for example, in Frozen, there's the prince who at the beginning, he seems like such a great guy and he's like totally love bombing, Anna, right? And he totally is doing all the classic tricky people things. And then we find out at the end that he was actually a really bad person. So you can use as an example, like, remember the prince from the movie Frozen? Well, that was a tricky person, right? He seemed like such a good guy in the beginning and he said all these nice things to her. And then he turned out that he wasn't. Another example for older kids would be like Loki from, I think it's like the Marvel universe. He's like the tricky guy, essentially. Like, he actually is a tricky person by default. Like, that's who he is. But if you didn't know that about him, then you wouldn't know that he was until you find out that he's got ulterior motives, right? So using examples from either movies or books, like, there's tons of them, right? Yeah. As examples to use for tricky people.
In my practice, I always have a wolf puppet that has it in sheep's clothing. So the puppet who looks like a sheep, but it's actually not a sheep. And I'm sure there is some book out there that has this in it, but that's just what I use for young kids to explain that sometimes that happens.
Yeah. And the way that you know that they've locked it in is when they start picking out the tricky people in the whatever, the movie or the show or the book. They'll be like, oh, so-and-so, I bet that's a tricky person, or that seems like a thing a tricky person would say or do. And then okay, they've got the concept. So it's a really helpful way for them to bridge that idea of like what a tricky person is. And again, if they are breaking those body safety rules or asking to keep a secret or don't believe you when you say something, you can kind of tell that they're not going to help you if you're in danger. Then that's not a safe person, right? And so it helps kids identify. And so the thing that you want them to do when they have determined that that's an unsafe person or a tricky person is to come to you. So the really important piece here is for them to check in with you. So-and-so did this. It doesn't feel right. I think they might be a tricky person. I'm not sure. What do you think, Mom? And this is your opportunity to say, okay, well, tell me more. Like what, and so you can determine with them, is this a safe person or not a safe person? Is this someone who did have good intentions and I just need to talk to them? Or does this seem like this was nefarious and I need to, put distance between this person and my child, right?
Awesome. The other thing I have written down on my end, and you tell me what you think about this, is special alone time. So when you've got a kiddo, sorry, my dogs are barking. So special alone time, like someone asks you to be alone with them, especially not wanting adults to be around.
Yeah, big red flag. Big. Like, and this is something that you would want to hopefully vet ahead of time, So if this is someone that needs to have that one-on-one time, like it might be a piano tutor or it might be a neighbor who you have to count on, right? Like those situations are hard to navigate, but those are the situations where you want to talk to the adult very clearly and openly about your body safety rules, let them know that you're educating your child, because that really does reduce the likelihood of that person targeting your child, because they know this isn't going to be an easy target. This is a child who's being educated. This is a child who knows their rights and knows to speak up. So that's not the offenders want the easiest target. But when we're talking about, that accessing of that one-on-one time, a lot of times that can be part of the grooming process for the adult, right? So the person has targeted a child. They need to first groom the adult to have that adult give them access. So if they're finding reasons or ways to get alone time with your child, and it seems like it's becoming more and more frequent, that would be something concerning. I would say that that's like a yellow flag that you should be paying closer attention to. There's a lot of characteristics that are concerning in terms of like, does this person only want to ever hang out with kids? Do they seem to be on multiple, teams? Like, are they a sports coach, but they're also doing this kind of thing with kids? Sometimes it could be a person who just really loves working with kids, right? And that, of course, is fine. But more times it seems like it's adults who tend to want to work with kids and be around kids all the time and don't really have their own, whether that's their own family or like they're not really socializing with other adults. They'd, if they're at an event, they'd rather hang out with the kids than with the adults. Like those are, yellow flag signs to just say, I want to pay closer attention to how this person interacts with kids and how much alone time are they trying to get with kids. Coaches in particular have a lot of power. And again, if you're if that adult is in a position of power and your child is trying to get into like some championship or some, major sports, and they're utilizing that power to spend more one-on-one time with children, teens or whatever that is, that's something to pay closer attention to. And sadly, a lot of people just don't recognize the signs and they don't know how to step in or how to have that conversation or who to have that conversation with. Do they talk to that person's superior or do they talk directly to them? So there's a lot of things to consider in that. And there's a fantastic book I recommend for parents called Duck, Duck, Groom that talks about how to manage situations like that. And the author of the book, who's also a social worker and therapist, talks about the conversations that she's had with offenders and how they go about the grooming process. So it's really, I think, a powerful book if you want to learn more about the grooming process.
Okay, that's more written. That's for adults. I assume that's
yes.
Okay, beautiful. Yeah, I know it's becoming a conversation in children's sports right now, more and more prevalent that we're hearing about this, especially as kids move away from child-led play, which is sad, into more organized sports that will see more of that and just being aware. This is where too, when we're talking about that special alone time is why, and you mentioned this, but I want to highlight it again, is when you have play dates, even if it's a child's best friend, keep the doors open in your house. Like keep them open. Like absolutely. Even if we know the child really well, that to me is really important. It's just like we said with Now, you don't have to have sleepovers. I understand that. Only about half the parents I know are comfortable with it, which I think is saying that we're aware of this, at least in Canada. Like, I'm not sure where you are. We're in Alberta. But that whole thing of the kids sleeping in an open space where the adults have access instead of in a bedroom.
Yeah. And also, even with drop-off play dates, right? Or even if you're the one hosting, I always recommend to be an unpredictable parent. Pop in with snacks or,
Laundry. My mom and the laundry. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, like just where you can be within earshot, listen in on certain conversations. Like, I'm not saying to be like a spy and, invade your child's privacy, but up to a certain point, your child doesn't need that privacy from you per se, especially if they're playing with other kids. Like, there shouldn't be this idea of privacy until your kids are a lot older and they require that. And I think there's definitely room and space for that as your kids get older. But when they're younger, especially when there are peers over, and especially because of these rates of abuse, and we also have to recognize kids are just curious. They might not be getting the education at home. Your child's friend might be completely like void of any of this kind of education, and they're just purely curious. Like, especially within a certain age range, we know that curiosity of bodies and it is completely age appropriate and normal. Nevertheless, that doesn't mean it should be allowed. It just means that we need to intervene, educate, redirect, right? So just because it's like kids are playing doctor and, some exposure happened, doesn't mean that it's like, oh, that's fine, no problem. Like, that's age appropriate. We don't have to say anything. This would be an opportunity, actually. I would say it's a teachable moment for kids to remind them, actually, it's not appropriate. Remember, we talked about private parts and private part safety. Like, we're not supposed to show anybody. Nobody should be showing you. They probably aren't getting taught at home. So that might be, if that happens, right? That might be why this child did it. But we want to have that conversation with our child and then let the parents of that other child know, hey, FYI, this happened. This is the conversation that I had with my child. We let your child know that that wasn't appropriate, like without shaming anyone. But we just want to let you know that this happened so that you can have that conversation as well. So again, it's not even about shaming kids, especially the younger they are. Now, if we're talking about older kids, 11 years and somewhere in that range, 9 to 12, kids should know by that point. That should be something that even if, they did happen in school or, they've recognized that it's inappropriate, someone at some point has said something, they should recognize that that's not okay. So in those situations, those are more like yellow flag behaviors where I would say you want to check in a little bit deeper to see what's going on, what the root of this is. Make sure you're having that conversation with all the adults involved, because that would be a more serious conversation of like, has this escalated? Has this happened before? Is there a root source of this? Like, were you exposed to seeing something similar? And that's why you're experimenting with this. Like, what is going on? And usually within that older age range, it is typically because of some kind of online exposure to inappropriate content.
Yeah. And that's something that comes up. And I talk to my kids about this, just being aware of, they have some kids have, my kids don't have cell phones, but other kids do. Actually, more kids have them than not. So with the internet in their pocket is being shown images. Like, that is something kids are curious about, being shown pictures. And to me, would you recommend that we start talking about that as soon as possible? I started with my
Absolutely.
kids at about 6. I was like, somebody might.
And that's a great age. Yeah, I think that's a great age to just start the conversation. I think a lot of times people are also worried of like, how do I have this conversation if I haven't even talked about the birds and the bees yet? Like, and I have to jump to what porn is, right? If you haven't had that basic conversation of, bodies and the potential for like just the basics of sex and what that is, whether it's reproductive or just for like helping kids understand that this is something that adults do without obviously any information about the mechanics or any of that, but just the baseline of like what is age appropriate to teach. And there are some really amazing educators out there that talk about like, what do you talk about at certain ages? And like you said, even at 6, kids can understand some of these basics so that you can then have that conversation. Like, by the way, if you're ever online and you come across this, whether it's at school or at a friend's house and someone shows you something like this, that's adult content. It's actually not meant for kids. It's not even realistic for adults because it's entertainment for adults, but it's not meant for kids. So if you come across this, here's what to do. And so the conversation should really be based around like, what do you do if you do come across this, right? Not like, you don't have to go into the depths of what, inappropriate content is. But you can say, if you see, these kinds of pictures where there's people that are, have no clothes on, or they're doing things with each other that, you're not understanding what that is. That's because it's not meant for you. And the first thing you do is you close it or you walk away. You don't need to look at it anymore. And then you can talk to me. And just remember, you're never going to be in trouble. Even if you were curious and you looked, you can still tell me you're not going to be in trouble and have that conversation. So that's really important.
Yeah, we've had someone, the founder for Defend Young Minds.
Oh, perfect.
So if anybody wants, check out our podcast, look up, her name's
Kristen.
Kristen?
Yeah.
Yeah, with Defend Young Minds, they have free resources on how to talk to kids at different ages about pornography and images online. So Defend Young Minds. If you're like, how do I, now you're thinking.
And they have great books.
Conversations.
Yeah, she has two really great books. One is like a junior version and the other one's an older. We've read the junior version. The kids actually really enjoy it because there's like a, what do you call it? It's like Easter egg hunts in the book where they're looking for something. So it makes it engaging. The kids want to read it again, which I thought was really clever because it helps them get that, information really sunk in. So yeah, really great books and a really great resource for talking about that.
Yeah, because I think that is something that comes up. And I've seen it with some of the kids I've worked with where, not always, I want to be clear, this is not always one of the steps in grooming, but it has been for when it's been adults a lot of the time versus peers, where they're interested to see, I think, how kids react. Tell me if this is wrong, but showing children images and pornography, especially if they're going to bring kids into pornography, right? Like if that is part of their MO. So that's something I want to talk to.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, and they're even using, unfortunately, CSAM. They're using content that shows children engaging in this kind of stuff. So that even more like normalizes it even more for a child, or it gives that offender and the sort of ammunition, right, to say, oh, this happens. Like whoever told you that is not telling you the truth because look, kids are doing it, right? So unfortunately, it is used in a really nefarious way. Of course, the content itself is nefarious, but just to let parents know, it's really important that you do have this conversation early because the average age of exposure today is between 9 and 12. So, and on the young end, I've heard many situations where, a 6-year-old has come across it because they have an older sibling who had access to it. So,
yeah. I think having that vocabulary of talking about vagina, penis, breasts, like just so it's open and there's no shame around talking about those things.
Absolutely.
So if a child has someone show them something or asks to touch their body or touch someone else's body, whatever it is, that child is just easily, the language is there. Like there's no shame around the discussion. Because if we're already uncomfortable talking about those parts, how is a child supposed to come to us and share that with you? Exactly. When there's already this discomfort with our own sexuality or, talking about these things with our kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which then leads to the next point where you will never be in trouble if you tell me. Never. Like
exactly.
So I think kids worry about because they're being told they're going to get in trouble. You're not going to get in trouble.
And also to say, if someone tells you that you're going to get in trouble about talking to me about anything, like that might be a tricky person because you should know that, if somebody tells you mom and dad's going to be mad or they're going to get in trouble, they're just lying to you if they're saying that you're not going to get in trouble. That's a tricky person because there is nothing that you can tell me that will make me not love you or be mad at you or, so I think it's really important to be really explicit about that. Like there is nothing that you could do that would ever make me love you less or make me be so mad at you that you'd be in trouble for something that wasn't even your fault. Even if someone told you that it's your fault, that might be a tricky person because you know that you can't get in trouble with me, right? So those are really important conversations to have.
Okay, beautiful. Now, there may be a few parents, we'll just take a couple minutes here, who are listening, who have, they're saying, I'm worried, like I'm having some feelings right now that maybe something has happened. What are some things that you're going to say for parents to look for if this has maybe happened? A child has been perpetrated against. Do you want to just touch on that a little bit? Just some things.
Yeah, I mean, I actually wrote a blog recently called The Power of Attunement because when parents are really tuned in and they have an open relationship that, is based on trust and is based on open, transparent communication, it will be easier for you to start to recognize if something is off. And then how do I ask the right questions, right? So I can share that link to that blog with you so that
that'd be
parents can see. Yeah, there's a number of different kinds of questions. We want to stay away from leading questions. So if you're like, I think Uncle so-and-so, is doing something, the last thing you want to do is say, is Uncle so-and-so touching you? Like, we want to stay away from leading questions. So, it's really important to just create opportunities for your child to talk to you. You can say, hey, I've noticed that you seem a little sad lately, or you seem really nervous anytime that we go to so-and-so's house, or when you go to school. Is anything, going on that you want to share? Like, I just want to remind you that, you're never going to get in trouble for anything that's happening or anything that even happened in the past. It could have happened a year ago, so we want to create that space for kids to feel like they can come and talk to you now. So I'll share that list with you. And the other thing that I want to also recommend to parents is to jot down. Like, a lot of times we have a million things going on in our head, and it can feel like overwhelming to go like, am I seeing things, or is this spot on? Like, am I noticing things? Sometimes we want to listen to our gut, but we're like, is it my paranoia, or is it something that I'm really seeing? So I recommend to parents to like jot down a timeline. When did you start noticing a shift in behavior? It's important to recognize what those shifts are, right? So part of that blog that I'm going to share with you also has a list of signs to look for, right? Is there a change in eating behavior or sleeping behavior? Is there, if you have a younger child, are they reverting to older behaviors? Like, if they are potty trained, are they starting to like wet their pants now? Like, things like that. So you'll see a list of those behaviors. If you see any of those behaviors, jot them down, right? Make a note, like almost a timeline of like, when did I start to see this shift in behavior? What other things were happening at that time or have continued to happen? Is there a new person in their life? Are there new friends in their life? Has the, friendships have shifted? Like, did my child mention something and I kind of overlooked it? So like, jot down anything that you can think of. You might notice a pattern. You might cross-reference, like, this list has these behaviors and I'm noticing that like 5 out of the 6 are, things that my child is doing. So maybe I need to look deeper. If you, feel like there's something going on and your child's just not opening up to you, this is where I would always recommend to have potentially a professional step in. So you might want to take them to a play therapist or an art therapist and share these concerns with them and say, like, I think something's going on. I've tried to talk to them. Nothing's opening up. Like, maybe this is, something that you can help with, right? Because play therapists and art therapists are trained in how to help kids feel comfortable and safe to communicate things that are happening in their lives internally that they're not ready to share, maybe with a parent.
And just be clear, when you've had a child who is sexually abused, they rarely will talk about it. That's the thing that parents don't realize, is disclosures are actually very intermittent, and they're very, like, it's sporadic, and if they don't want to talk about it, it makes them feel really uncomfortable. They're more likely to show you through images and play sequence. I'm a play therapist. So, and once in a while they'll say something like your young kids, but it's not comfortable to talk about. I promise you, they don't come in and just go, ugh, they're not adults.
Well, and the other thing that I also wanted to say is a lot of times kids will share a certain amount of information to see how you respond to it. It can be coded almost, yeah.
And it's very, like I say, they almost spit it out and really quickly pivot from it. So it's a very short sentence. He did this, and then they don't want to talk about it anymore. Versus coming in and wanting to share this long narrative. I was like, no, they don't want to do that.
For sure.
So
yeah, it's a very uncomfortable, if they're in an unsafe situation or an uncomfortable situation, especially if it's someone that is within the family, that seems to be a lot of times the biggest challenge is like, what's going to happen if I tell? Is it going to break up the family? Is this person going to do the thing that they said they were going to do? There's so many questions that a child has that they don't know how to get the answers to. And so they just won't say anything. But a lot of time, they will give telltale signs, or they may share something that you didn't realize was kind of an admission of like something's going on. And so you didn't know how to ask the next right question. So the child may think you don't care, or they may think that you aren't concerned, or they may think, I guess that was okay because they didn't say anything about that. So a lot of times a parent can miss it because of the way that it's phrased. And again, so this is why I always say, if you go through your checklist, you've written down all the things and you've cross-referenced it and you're like, something's going on, but my child's not talking to me. This is where I always recommend to bring in a professional third party who can help.
Beautiful. Now, just as we're just have a couple minutes left, tell me about some of the resources you have. Like, you have a podcast, correct?
Yeah, my podcast is mostly for adult survivors.
Okay, adult survivors.
Yeah, who have, gone through this. They might be parents. They are looking for resources on their own self-healing journey. So it's really more focused on that. Although I do have components of like, I bring on experts to talk about maybe online safety or books that they've written about abuse prevention. So there is a mixture of it, but it is mostly for those who are survivors or who support survivors. So that's what the About Consent podcast is. It's about really reclaiming your power as a survivor. But my other resources are, I have a really big focus at the moment on school safety, because unfortunately, schools are one of the places where peer-to-peer abuse happens the most. And parents are unaware of it. Educators are not being trained enough to recognize signs like that, or to even recognize grooming and like how to report it between staff. So if one adult is grooming a child, how should they go about reporting it, making sure that they recognize that that is grooming. And, you know, a lot of times adults who work in schools are like, I just don't know and I don't want to get someone in trouble. So they won't report it until abuse happens. And then there's, you know, the response to it instead of the prevention of it. So schools are a lot of times ill-equipped. And I'm in Canada also, by the way, in BC. But for those who are in the US listening, like there's a big shift that's happening with the Department of Education. So there's a lot of uncertainty as to like, you know, is the training and the education curriculums that are in place now going to continue? That can help reduce the risk. So I focus a lot on school safety. So if there are parents who are starting to send their kids to, whether it's kindergarten or elementary school, you know, there are resources there for like, what do you do to prepare your child before they enter? What kinds of questions should you be asking? So there's, you know, resources on my website for that, as well as like blog posts around that. And then just in general, like how to get started, right? How do you get started with teaching abuse prevention in a way that's empowering and not scary, right? So let's stay away from like scaring our kids into safety, which is how I was raised. And I think a lot of people were as well. But we can do this in a way that is actually empowering to our kids and helps them learn about their rights and do things in a way that helps them to take that power back, even as children, because kids are the most vulnerable in our population. So how can we give them tools to not only recognize safe and unsafe behaviors, but also to know and recognize who the safe adults are in their lives so that they can seek their support and not allow abuse to ever escalate.
Yeah, I'm on your website. What a beautiful website. We'll include this so if you guys are watching this on our site, just scroll down and I have her website there. And man, you got a lot of great resources. I'm going to have some fun going through here later today. So thank you. Like, this is amazing. So we'll make sure that all of this is included, including that blog you spoke about. We'll make sure it's included on the resources below. So thank you so much for your time today. This is very helpful. This is just parents know, as a parent, this is the number one thing I worry about more than anything, just because of how many kids with peers this happens to. So play dates make me the most nervous. You know, sleepovers make me nervous. These are the sorts of things that I just think is so important we start talking about, because This is where we're seeing this. And I mean, 1 in 4 girls and 1 in 6 boys, and 70% is happening within peers. To me, like, we got to start paying attention. That's underreported probably.
Yeah.
So thank you for all the work you do in this field and protecting our kids. And I love you're from Canada. Where in BC are you from?
I'm actually from El Salvador. I was raised in New York, and then I've been living in Canada now for 15 years. I love it. And I was living in Ontario at first, Northern Ontario, which I've never experienced such cold in my life. When we moved to BC. Yeah. So we moved to BC about 3 years ago. So we're in the Kootenays, which is like, for those US listeners, it's like the Rockies, Colorado kind of area.
Yeah, no, it's beautiful. I'm glad. BC's lovely. So, well, thank you so much. I have to run.
Thank you.
Consult, but thank you. And then this will be live in April.
Awesome. Well, thank you for having me.
Thank you. Okay.
Bye.